Scroll through social media in East Malaysia today, and you will find a very specific type of anger going viral. It is a loud, highly organized push demanding that the state of Sarawak secede from Malaysia entirely. To understand why, you have to look 600 miles across the South China Sea to Putrajaya, the federal administrative center of Malaysia. For the people living in the Borneo states of Sabah and Sarawak, that vast physical distance mirrors an equally massive political disconnect. For over half a century, the federal government has extracted billions of dollars in oil, gas, and timber from East Malaysia. Yet the local populations producing that wealth remain some of the poorest citizens in the Federation. The legal basis for this entire relationship is the 1963 Malaysia Agreement, commonly known as MA 63. This is the founding treaty that merged Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak into a single nation. Now, local politicians and legal experts are issuing a sharp warning. If the federal government continues to ignore the historical grievances surrounding MA 63, they risk a complete collapse of federal-state relations. Formed in 1963, Malaysia was intended to be an equal partnership, but modern advocacy groups are picking that history apart. They argue Sabah and Sarawak were still British colonies, meaning the local representatives who signed lacked a true democratic mandate. If true, that lack of local consent violates the United Nations decolonization declarations. These international laws ensure colonized people are granted full self-determination before absorption into another nation. Because of this discrepancy, local activists view the creation of Malaysia as an invalid colonial handover rather than a legitimate democratic union. Today, that historical inequality translates into math. Sabah holds massive offshore oil reserves, making it a critical engine for the entire country's economy. Under a 1976 agreement, Sabah receives a mere 5% petroleum royalty from Petronas. The remaining 95% goes to the federal government. Now, local leaders aggressively demand their royalty be quadrupled to 20%, framing it as an absolute right. A forgotten constitutional clause also requires Putrajaya to return 40% of all net federal revenue collected from Sabah back to the state. The federal government simply suspended that payment formula in 1974. When Putrajaya extracts vast resources while ignoring its financial obligations, a historical debate over a treaty becomes a daily reality of economic starvation for East Malaysians. Next door in Sarawak, leaders are fighting back through sheer institutional force. They are actively utilizing their existing regional autonomy to build an institutional fortress. Sarawak's massive bureaucracy includes 18 distinct ministries to manage local affairs. Their economic autonomy is vast, running their own commercial bank, multimedia authority, and domestic energy grid. They even fund their own armed maritime force, the Sarawak Coast Guard, to protect local waters. By building parallel financial, infrastructural, and defensive institutions, Sarawak operates much closer to an independent nation than a typical state. That heavy infrastructure makes any threat to leave the Federation highly credible. So what actually happens if the online chatter becomes public policy and East Malaysia decides to pack its bags? Secession offers heavy pros: total regional autonomy, 100% of natural resource wealth, and a distinct national identity. But these are counterweighted by massive risks. Splitting invites severe economic uncertainty, diplomatic isolation, and the astronomical logistical costs of building a new state. The fact that local citizens are seriously weighing these extreme calculations is the direct result of Putrajaya failing to honor the exact terms of the MA 63 contract. Returning constitutional rights and financial dues to Sabah and Sarawak is no longer a political favor that the federal government can hand out during election years. It is a mandatory legal obligation. Putrajaya faces a ticking clock. To keep the country intact, the federal government has to prove to East Malaysia that the 1963 agreement is still worth the paper it is printed on.